Hello everyone, welcome. This is Marcus Demnet, Cloud Architect at Google Cloud, and I'm Ebba Kramer, heading up the gaming section in Sweden for Google Cloud. We are super excited to have a gaming session this year at Google Cloud Summit. The gaming industry is going through some very interesting technology shifts, and the direction it's heading in is one where Google Cloud has a clear role to play. We think that gaming will change quite a lot in the years to come. We think these large and beautiful games, referred to as AAA titles, will become available to a much larger audience, to a broader demographic, through more devices, and to places in the world where people previously could not play these games. We also think the interaction between gaming studios and gamers will be different. Instead of having the gaming studios release these huge bulk games, where you've had thousands of developers spending 2 years developing one title and then shipping it, moving over to the next. Instead of having that, the gaming studios will release in smaller portions, more frequently, and in closer feedback loops with the gamers. So our session today is going to be about the technology shifts driving these changes, and how the gaming studios are grabbing these opportunities that the technology shifts bring. So we will hear from our customers. Embark Studios, the fast-moving new studio in Stockholm that everyone is talking about. And Massive Entertainment, who launched their highly anticipated sequel to Tom Clancy's The Division in March this year. But before we let our dear customers up on stage, I would like to dive a little bit deeper into the technology shifts I was going on about. So Marcus, would you help me with that?
Sure. Thank you. So the future Ebba is describing with the new audience of AAA title gamers is enabled by stream gaming, such as Stadia. Ebba also talked about games being released more frequently, with a shortened feedback loop between the studios and the gamers. This will be enabled by open source technologies such as Kubernetes and Agonis, which Embark Studios is going to tell us more about later. At Google, we're passionate about helping you create, connect, and scale your games in a lot of different ways and across many different channels. Today, Google is working with the games industry to help developers succeed, and cloud is at the center of those efforts. We want to help you create great games and connect with players globally and scale your business. So let's talk about the future of cloud gaming. Let's talk about Stadia. Stadia is a new kind of gaming platform. It brings high-fidelity AAA games to any screen that can run Chrome, that being a TV, a computer, or a mobile device. Pairing Stadia with Google Cloud is a great combination. You can run game servers for all your supported platforms on Google Cloud and get unique benefits for Stadia. So what do Stadia and GCP do together? From a security perspective, the only thing on the public internet will be your Chromecast. The rest of the network traffic will be on Google's private network. Latency is super important when it comes to games. Today, Google has 20 data centers and an additional 134 points of presence globally. This means that you will connect to this network in a location very close to where you are, regardless of where you are in the world. And this gives lowest possible latency. And recently, we announced our new compute-optimized virtual machines with clock speeds up to 3.8 gigahertz. Together, these new processors and our amazing networks gives you really great performance. From a cost perspective, there will also be a benefit. network traffic between Google Cloud and Stadia will simply cost less. It will actually be less expensive to run your game servers on Google Cloud if they're interacting with Stadia. Earlier, I mentioned Kubernetes as a disruptor, as it allows games to be released more frequently. However, Kubernetes doesn't understand game service. Kubernetes is designed for stateless workloads. So, together with Ubisoft, we built an extension to Kubernetes called Agones that teaches Kubernetes about game servers. It teaches Kubernetes about how to handle UDP endpoints. It teaches Kubernetes how to handle the life cycle of a game server, so that Kubernetes doesn't decide to scale down your server in the middle of a match. So with Agones, we're building an open API to run and scale your games with Kubernetes in an environment of your choosing. And in the same way we approach Kubernetes with Google Kubernetes Engine, we're also working on a managed solution for Agones. So what else is our Cloud for Gaming team working on? Well, we're focusing on 3 different areas. The first is game server hosting, and I just mentioned Agones and a managed offering. We're focused on making our compute platform the best and most high-performance place to run your games. But to run large multiplayer games, you also need platform services. You need a place to run your APIs, so that your users can log in and get assigned to a match. And third, we're bringing the scale of our analytics and machine learning solutions to gaming as well. So, we are really excited about all of this. We're excited about the new types of games that you'll build, and we're very excited to work with you to scale those games up in the cloud.
Great. Thank you, Marcus. So Marcus can talk about these things forever, but we wanted to give time to our customers instead. So if you want to hear the longer version of what we're doing with Google Cloud and gaming, please take a snap of this and listen to our dear colleague, Robert Martin, who lays it down beautifully on YouTube. Yes. So one of the great advantages working with gaming is that the people you interact with are always so tech-savvy. They're really quick at adapting to new technology and build their own technology. And one studio where this is more true than anywhere else is Embark Studios. So please, Johan Mjönes, Tech Director at Embark, please tell us your story.
Thank you, Ebba. So if I can, oh, there they are. So what I want to talk about is infrastructure for game companies. But before I do that, we have a cake here from everybody at Embark. And it's to Björn and the team at Massive for their launch of the Division 2 this spring. Round of applause. Well done. Now, so the cool stuff about working where I work is that I get to show off some of the amazing stuff that my team is doing, or especially my talented colleagues. So if you take a look at this, and I'll give you some context to what you're looking at. So if I want to take a robot, and hopefully a more beautiful version than one you see here, if I want to put that into a game, I have to spend about 400 man-hours creating a fully featured set of animation for something like this. And at Embark, we believe that we can reduce 70 or 80% of that work with automation and tooling and workflows. And in fact, what you see here, this robot, and there are actually 2 versions of them. What you see is that what we've done here is not traditional animation. What we've done is that we've designed these robots, and we've given them physical attributes, such as weight and the strength of the motors in the joints, and then we've used machine learning to animate them. You see the 2 different versions. You can see that they move differently, right? It's apparently that the larger one is much, much heavier than the small one. And that's the physically based animation at work. So at Embark, we believe that we can do more with less. And not only with stuff like animation, but essentially across every discipline involved in making games. Now, if you haven't heard about Embark, that's absolutely fine. We're a new game studio. We were founded late last year, and there's 85 of us now. And Embark, we believe that we can do more with less, but we also believe that there's a democratization happening in the world of making games. So the barriers of entry are being lowered, and we want to be a part of that in two ways. One is that we want to utilize these lowered barriers of entry when we make our own games, and we also want to help lower them even further for everybody else. And the basis of my talk is this. I claim that games are becoming services. So what I mean by that is that it used to be 15 or 20 years ago when you went out and bought a game. You go to the store and you would buy something for 60 bucks. And that would be, what you held in your hand was the game, right? But nowadays, as Ebba mentioned, it's not uncommon for smash hits in the world of games to start as very small games by very small teams, and small in terms of content and features, and also in the terms of number of players. And then what happens is that they work on this game and they iterate and they make perhaps hundreds of releases in a short succession in order to create something, combining their vision for the game and data and feedback from players to create something that can eventually become a smash hit. And when you're working in that way, in this cyclic development, what you want to achieve is a very small time to market. Now remember that traditionally a lot of games has been developed with over perhaps a 3 or 4 or 5 year period. And if you're doing that, then you're betting a lot of time on your game actually being a success. So there's another industry that has gone through a similar transition from box products into services, and that is the tech industry. So how many of you were in the previous talk up here? Okay, a few of you. So you're going to recognize the term DevOps, right? And I'm going to give you 3 examples about how the tech industry mitigated these issues with working with services. So the first one is DevOps. And DevOps, if you're not familiar with the term, it's essentially an extension of Agile focused specifically on software engineering and working with services. And DevOps is about 2 things. It's about eliminating handovers and automation. And eliminating handovers is in the name, right? You used to have one development team and another operations team. And what you do is that you eliminate handovers by creating one team with a complete ownership of the entire life cycle of the product. And the other aspect is automation. And automation is all about giving you that short time to market. And you achieve that by essentially automating every part of your process that a computer can do better than you. So that's what the SRE people like to call toil, for example. That's menial work, right? A computer can do that better, and a computer software can scale better than humans can when doing this. The other thing is open source. So the tech industry has been fantastic in embracing open source. And they've embraced open source as a way to be able to collaborate with others on things that isn't, strictly speaking, your core business, right? So what you do is that you collaborate with others to create the thing that isn't your core business so that you can actually focus your engineering time on solving your core business and doing the stuff that actually makes you money. And the third thing is cloud services. So cloud services are amazing because they allow you to choose your level of abstraction. So if you're a small indie studio and you're building a game and you want to have a leaderboard for your game, what you can do then is that you can go out and get a leaderboard as a service, right? So you don't have to build or operate anything. But if you want to operate it, you can go out and get Kubernetes as a service and run it on top of Kubernetes. Or if you want to run it on a VM, you can. Or if you want to run it on physical data centers, physical hardware in data centers, then you can do that as well. But the point is that it allows you to choose your abstraction. So how should you organize then? Well, I like to be inspired by indie studios, right? So indie studios typically are well-aligned teams with end-to-end responsibility, working with a single product and having influence over processes and tools. And the point of this is to give them as few dependencies as possible so that they can iterate as fast as humanly possible. So this talk is about infrastructure then. So how do you work with infrastructure supporting teams like this? Because traditionally in the games industry, what you would do is that you would create enormous centralized teams tasked with operations. But we've decided that operations is no longer supposed to be anything separate. So what you do is that you enable the independence of these teams. So you help them with end-to-end solutions to their problems. So you help them create tools, for example, and you help them with expertise in stuff like cloud or networking or IT or distributed systems, for example. So I want to give you 2 examples of stuff that we've built. So the first one is, I mentioned the importance of iterations, right? So you want a quick time to market, and you want a very short time between having an idea and being able to validate or invalidate idea. So what we've done is that we've created software for playtests. So if you're not familiar with the games industry, a playtest is essentially the continuous integration of the gaming industry. That's where everything comes together, and you can actually figure out if that weapon on that map playing that character is actually any fun to play. So you need to play your game very, very often, and you need to play it in an environment that is very similar to what your players would experience. So you want to be essentially very production-like when you do this. So what we did was that we created software and other types of solutions to be able to give anybody the possibility of creating a playtest and then sharing that with colleagues. We manage builds, we manage starting game servers for multiplayer games, and we handle feedback, all in this solution. So another thing is game servers, and I think this is amazing. I don't know if you saw Björn speaking about game servers earlier. This is a super fascinating topic in the world of multiplayer AAA titles, simply because game servers tend to be operationally the most expensive thing that you can deal with when running multiplayer games. And they're expensive for a few reasons. One is that they're computationally intensive, right? They have a huge CPU footprint, memory footprint. Sometimes they have specific network requirements. They're also expensive because you need to run a lot of them, right? Think tens of thousands of game servers. But they're also expensive because they tend to be optimized fairly late. So I spoke about handovers earlier, but imagine the case where you have a development team building a game server, and they develop it on super high-end hardware. And then they hand it over to an operations team, and that operations team is tasked with running them as cheaply as possible. The problem with that is the operations team wants to use the cheapest hardware that they can find. So what do you think happens when a piece of CPU-bound software developed on super high-end workstations gets deployed to the cheapest hardware that you can find? You're going to have an issue, right? So what we did was that we took a production-first approach to this instead. So the first ever playtest that we ran with multiplayer enabled, we ran our game servers on Google Cloud, on Agones, in a way that we imagine, at least today, is the way that we would run them in the future. And that gives us 2 benefits. One is that we actually get to practice running these game servers for real in production, right? So we're essentially forced to implement stuff like metrics and log collection and crash collection, and teaching our developers who work with the game servers how to use these technologies, because that's what they're going to have to use once we go live. The second thing is that we can scale up, right? We started on a very tiny instance, right? So with very tight margins and with super clear limitations in terms of CPU. And that's intentionally because we want every time we make a decision to go to a beefier instance, we want that to be an informed decision by the game team. And we want the game team to, at that point, be able to make a decision about whether or not to accept the higher cost per player for a game server, or to make a decision instead to invest that time and money in optimizing the game server. So that's what I had. So I've been told that you should always have a takeaway slide, right? So I included one, and it only says one thing, right? So if you work with infrastructure, then enable your teams. That's it.
Thank you so much, Johan. And please remain on stage, because now we're going to form this little panel. Yes. So I would like to welcome back on stage Björn Lindberg from Massive Entertainment. Let's see if we have... Yes, here we got him. And I said, yes, please sit there. So Björn had an earlier session today. And Björn, for the ones that weren't present there, maybe we could just start out with you summarizing. I mean, you released Tom Clancy The Division 2 in March in cloud. What was the basis for that decision? What were you after?
Yeah, the thing we did before, Johan has a good deal because he's kind of clean slate guy. He can start over from the beginning. We have been doing online games for as long as the studio's been live, which is over 20 years now. And we have built a lot of technology, obviously, and we don't want to part with it that easily. So we have kind of more bare metal approach where we run game servers as processes and no cloud, no fancy stuff, basically. So, but what it basically came down to was that the point where we say, okay, we need to run on hardware somewhere, and was either we buy or rent bare metal hardware and run everything ourselves. And it turns out, of course, that it's quite a lot of work, going down there in the data center and changing that drive and, make sure all the cables are right. So it's like, in a nutshell, it's easier to rent it from someone because it's not our core business to run servers. It's someone else's core business generally, and we want to concentrate in making a good game rather. So getting one problem away is in a good way.
Great.
So that's pretty much it. Like it solves a lot of problems for us, basically, not having to deal with that.
Great, great. So being able to focus on your core business, which is creating gaming experiences. Was there anything that surprised you during that journey?
Almost shameful to say. It's like it worked better than I expected. Oh. Like it worked really nice. Like from our point of view, when we run services, we have a bunch of programmers, and they assume Intel. They assume there's going to be a lot of things they can do. Like I want to do all these compiler intrinsics and have real-time clocks here and da. And sometimes when you go to virtual, that stuff is not supported readily, or performance on certain stuff like network drivers is not that great. But in our I was kind of anticipating there was going to be changes that need to be made to the software just to be able to run it in Google Cloud. But as far as I know, we haven't done anything basically. So it kind of works out the box, which is nice because like we don't want to make any special case for it.
Okay, great, thanks. So now directing myself to you, Johan. During your presentation, you mentioned the importance of sort of open source, and that Embark already is and will likely release some of what you build as open source. So in the years to come, what role do you think open source will play in the gaming industry?
So I think it's going to be tremendously important. I would imagine that there are some things that are unlikely to be open sourced immediately in the shape and form they're in today, game engines, for example. But when it comes to tooling, you have examples of like Blender, for example, which is now mature enough that it's replacing the commercial alternatives in that space. And what happens usually is that once you reach a certain level of maturity, it's going to be cheaper for companies to invest in the open source alternative and participate in that ecosystem rather than paying licenses for the commercial alternatives.
Great, thanks. So back to you, Björn. So the whole theme of our session today is about sort of technology shifts that are disrupting gaming, and we've been, talking about a few of them, but many have not been mentioned, like so virtual reality, augmented reality, the different applications of machine learning. Is there any technology shift that is your favorite, or that you think will have a huge impact in the gaming industry and perhaps is downplayed today?
Yeah, I tend to be conservative in my estimates because like it's usually about the gaming experience, and technology is never sold as the sake of technology. Like our customers rarely pay for technology, but I do think our streaming is going to have a huge impact because the market, the device is already there. You're not about selling a new console or a new piece of hardware. You take your laptop and go buy a game on Stadia, for instance, and you're done. So I think that's honestly that's going to be the big thing that's going to happen in the next coming years. And then I'm kind of leaning into what you were saying, also like open source or the availability of higher quality off-the-shelf products, like competent databases, for instance, that can actually do the things you want to. That Postgres in our case is like incredibly useful, and know that it works and that kind of stuff. It took them 20 years or so to get to that point, but like now it's really there, and there's no good incentive for us to go pay incredibly expensive enterprise licenses for databases and that kind of stuff.
Thanks. So Johan, directing myself at you again, and referring back to your presentation, you were talking about service evolution, and you mentioned DevOps, open source, and cloud. So now, realizing that those things are much more than just technology shifts, like they will have an impact on the gaming studio, the organization, the culture that implement these things. And now Embark Studios can start a little bit from a clean slate, given that it's a new studio, experienced people in a new studio. But can anyone do this, you think?
Absolutely. I mean, having a clean slate might help, but in my experience, the most important aspect is actually executive sponsorship, right? So you need to have a leadership team that believes that this is the way you want to work. But as long as you have that, to be honest, I don't think it matters if you're, a new game studio in Stockholm or if you're the UK government.
Björn, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say because to me it has a lot to do with what can you change, right? If you have a good code base, the defining quality of a good code base is that you can get rid of stuff you don't like. If everything is intermixed into a big ball of spaghetti, then you have a problem because you can never do away with that thing that you didn't like. So we are generally quite good at adapting new technology, but it's also a lot because we spend a lot of time not trying to make a big ball of spaghetti, right? So I mean, having a clean slate is great, but to some extent, I think the demanding quality of that kind of thing is that you can actually do away and change. Okay, I want to change database and then I want to do this thing and I want to do that thing. Can I do it without changing every single line of code in the product? Yes, we can in our case, which is great.
Okay, good. So I've been thinking about this. It's quite striking that there are many good game development studios in Sweden, Stockholm as well as Malmö. What do you think is the underlying reason for why Sweden is good at developing games? And do you think this is something that will persist in the future? I want to hear this from both of you, but...
So, I mean, to be honest, I've always thought about the tax incentives in the late 90s in Sweden that, if I remember correctly, put 1 million computers into the home of Swedes, and that kind of tool, a computer, combined with a lot of free time, with many of us who were teenagers at the time had. I think that's a pretty good opportunity for people to truly learn how they work.
Yeah, yeah, certainly. I mean, home PC. That was the thing in the 90s. You got like a Pentium or something, and then you can hack away on it. Now, I think there's two things generally. One is like we have good education in Sweden. It's not necessarily the absolute best of the world, but it's available to everyone and it's free. And the same is true for a lot of countries in Europe around here. So, and the other thing is, I think, company culture, at least in Sweden, is very, very demanding too much management to actually accept questions and critique from colleagues. So, for instance, I actively encourage my coworkers to tell me when I do something wrong. You say, Björn, you made poo-poo, please fix this, whatever. And because you get much better value of your teammates, especially if you're, in my case, I'm sitting as a tech director, so kind of the boss of everyone in a way, right? Which is super weird to me, honestly. I much prefer that when they just like be the other guy and just tell me like, Björn, this doesn't work, we need to fix this, and have a good discussion, because otherwise you end up in situations where people are afraid to tell, oh, Björn wrote that code, don't say anything, just don't worry about that thing, go over here instead, and then you don't get the benefit of your team, basically.
Okay, good. So we're going to finish off with just something forward-looking, and this is for you, Björn, because it's been announced that Tom Clancy: The Division 2 will be released on our friends' Stadia. Do you have any comments to that?
No, it's going to be great, I think. It's going to be available and great. I think that no, it's going to look pretty, and it's going to be a good game.
Okay, good. So now everyone can try it.
Yep. You don't have any excuses anymore.
No. And with that, we just want to thank you. Thank you so much for coming here, and hopefully there's going to be a gaming session next year as well. So see you there.